Can I, before we start, place on record that we consulted with the prosecution on a matter which could have security concerns and implications in our judgment, and that is why we decided not to raise the matter in open court. I thought we should just record that, and then are we ready for the witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yep.
Thank you, Your Honor. Before I proceed with the witness, I would like to inform this tribunal that the witness behind the curtain is the survivor of the sexual violence, and she is accompanied by an assistant that concern of her well-being, that will tell us when we'll stop or we will continue the interviews. With your permission, Your Honors, I will proceed with the witness.
Have you, I think you must tell the assistant that he or she must not hesitate at all, and that in other words, we would certainly not like her to wait long before she tells us, out of respect for all of us sitting here. As soon as she thinks that something must happen, she must make it happen. Will you explain that to her from our side completely?
Yes, I already explained to the assistant before the proceeding. The prosecutor calls Mrs. Kinkin Rahayu. Is she ready?
Iya, kami telah siap.
Your Honors, allow me to question the witness in Bahasa Indonesia. Ibu Kinkin Rahayu, terima kasih sudah menghadiri sidang ini dan bersedia menjadi saksi. Apakah Ibu dalam kondisi sehat?
Iya, saya dalam keadaan sehat.
Baik, terima kasih. Dapatkah Ibu menceritakan kepada kami semua di sini apa yang terjadi kepada Ibu pada tahun 1965?
Pada tahun 1965, saya mengalami peristiwa yang luar biasa, mencekam dan menakutkan, terutama kepada keluarga saya yang langsung merasakan peristiwa itu. Pada tahun 1965, saya mengalami yang pertama kali. Mengapa saya menyebut itu suatu penangkapan? Karena saya dalam hidup yang wajar-wajar saja dan masih beraktivitas sebagai seorang mahasiswi, tetapi langsung ditangkap. Bahkan penangkapan ini tidak hanya pada diri saya, tetapi 2 bulan sebelumnya didahului dengan penangkapan ayah saya, yang mana penangkapan itu diistilahkan dengan pengamanan. Sehingga saya bertanya, diamankan kemana? Diamankan yang bagaimana? Sehingga selama 2 bulan ayah saya tidak ada beritanya sama sekali. Maka saya bertanya kepada petugas yang menangkap saya, apa maksudnya aman? Dan saya mau dibawa kemana? Mereka menjawab, ini adalah perintah atasan dan tidak boleh dilawan. Sehingga saya pun sebagai rakyat kecil, seorang perempuan desa, saya tidak berdaya apa-apa. Saya tinggal menyiapkan pakaian saya dan membawa selembar sarung dan surjan bapak saya. Siapa tahu saya dibawa ke sebuah tempat, yaitu di Kodim Sleman. Ternyata Kodim itu sudah penuh. Dan saya dinaikkan ke truk lagi menuju suatu kamp yang bernama Kamp Cebongan. Di situ adalah bekas markas tentara yang karena peristiwa 65 markas itu berubah menjadi penjara. Sewaktu saya diturunkan dari truk dan digeledah, maka petugas menemukan sarung dan surjan ayah saya, lalu menanyakan, mengapa ini membawa sarung dan surjan? Saya jawab, karena saya tidak mungkin membawa ayah saya ke sini. Ayah dan ibu saya di rumah, sehingga saya cukup membawa pakaiannya. Siapa tahu ini buat obat kerinduan saya, di mana nanti saya akan diletakkan. Dan mereka percaya. Akhirnya di tempat itu pun kami ditempatkan dan laki-laki serta anak-anak dan bayi. Karena ibu-ibu yang dituduh gerwani itu masuk ke situ dengan segenap anak dan bayinya. Karena bapaknya diambil, ibunya diambil. Anak tidak bisa ikut orang lain, harus dibawa. Setelah di situ kami berusaha mencari informasi kalau ayah saya ada di situ. Dan secara kebetulan saya sering meminta air minum ke dapur, sahabat, sambil bertanya kepada teman-teman ada di situ. Saya dijawab, ayahmu ada di sini. Tetapi saya tidak pernah melihat ayah saya, cukup saya menitipkan pakaian ayah saya. Di situ setiap hari ada pemeriksaan. Yang laki-laki tidak lepas dari siksaan, pukulan, dan yang lain-lain. Diinjak atau diapakan, yang terdengar hanyalah jerit, mengaduh daripada yang diperiksa. Sedangkan kami, para tahanan perempuan, diperiksa. Dalam pemeriksaan itu kami ditanyakan, mana capmu gerwani? Saya jawab, saya bukan gerwani, tapi saya IPPI. walaupun saya menjawab bawah sampai ke pinggang. Jadi pinggang ke bawah harus kelihatan, diperiksa berputar-putar ada capnya gerwani atau tidak. Setelah mereka yakin bahwa tidak ada cap gerwani, maka kami baru ditanyai bermacam-macam persoalan. Di antaranya, apakah kamu pernah pergi ke lubang buaya? Ya, saya tanya, lubang buaya itu apa? Lubang buaya itu mana? Karena saya orang Yogyakarta. Akhirnya dengan pertanyaan-pertanyaan padaku itu, diantaranya adalah siapa dalam keluargamu yang terlibat G30 SPKI? Saya hanya bisa menjawab, ayah ibuku seorang petani, jadi tidak tahu menahu tentang partai PKI. Ayah ibuku hanya tahu tentang kesenian desa, karena di rumahku sering ada kegiatan menari wayang orang. Dalang itu sering diundang mendalang di Keraton Yogyakarta sebulan sekali, sehingga desaku itu sangat maju keseniannya. Dan di rumahku juga sering digunakan untuk latihan wayang orang, sehingga ada gamelan. Tetapi sayang, gamelan itu disita oleh mereka, oleh tentara-tentara itu, karena dianggap itu gamelan milik partai. Dan hampir saja rumahku juga disita karena disangka rumah yang memberi partai. Saya tidak mengerti sama sekali dengan cara berpikir mereka pada waktu itu. Setelah pemeriksaan selesai, akhirnya saya suruh tanda tangan bahwa saya hanya anggota IPPI. Dan saya hanya diperiksa sekali. Kebetulan sekali di KAN itu hadir seorang romo yang 1 minggu sekali memberikan komuni kudus kepada umat Katolik. Pada suatu saat saya minta bicara dengan romo tersebut. dalam Perhimpunan Mahasiswa Katolik Republik Indonesia. Saya di dalam kampus tidak mendapat skorsing apapun, karena saya sudah mendaftar sebagai anggota mahasiswa Perhimpunan Katolik Republik Indonesia. Mohon tolong Romo, saya direkomendasikan untuk dibebaskan supaya saya bisa kuliah kembali. Dan puji Tuhan, dengan doa dan usaha yang selalu saya tempuh mendekati Romo tersebut, saya direkomendasikan bebas oleh Romo dan dibebaskan pada bulan April 1966. Jadi saya berada di Kamp Cebongan selama 4 bulan.
Ibu tadi mengatakan bahwa Ibu ditangkap untuk pertama kalinya dan ditahan selama 4 bulan. Apakah Ibu pernah ditangkap lagi sesudah itu?
Pernah. Setelah saya bebas, saya mengurus surat-surat semuanya sehingga saya berhasil masuk kuliah lagi. Dan saya berhasil menjadi seorang guru karena usaha saya, karena tuntutan ekonomi saya, keluarga saya, karena bapak di penjara, adik saya 3 orang. Maka saya melamar pekerjaan dan diterima. Tetapi tanpa diduga, pada suatu malam, sebenarnya saya baru tidur belum lama. Karena sebagai mahasiswa saya harus menyalin kuliah dan mempersiapkan materi pelajaran buat murid saya. Maka jam 2 pagi saya belum lama tidurnya. Setelah itu saya sadar betul memang rumah saya yang berbunyi derak-derak pintunya itu kos saya. Setelah keseimbangan penuh, saya melangkah membuka pintu. Alangkah terkejutnya. Setelah pintu saya buka, saya melihat 6 orang menodongkan senjata dan 2 orang tanpa senjata. Terkejut dan sangat-sangat takut. Ada apa ini? Mereka menanyakan nama seseorang. Kamu bernama ini? Bukan. Nama saya ini. Tapi mereka tetap tidak percaya. Akhirnya menggeledah rumah saya. Setelah diketemukannya surat pembebasan saya dari Kamp Cebongan, mereka marah sekali. Nyatanya kamu PKI. Ini nyatanya ada surat pembebasan. Loh, itu kan surat pembebasan, Pak. Berarti dia bukan PKI, tidak pernah terlibat. Saya ditempeleng. Tidak mengerti maksud Bapak. Apakah gerilya politik wanita itu? Saya tidak punya waktu, Pak. Karena Pagi dan siang saya kuliah dan mengajar. Malam saya menyalin kuliah dan mempersiapkan materi pelajaran anak didik saya. Kembali saya dipukul. Meja yang saya tempati untuk berdiri itu digulingkan. Otomatis saya terjatuh dengan mejanya. Setelah itu, mereka kembali bertanya, bagaimana? Pilih ngaku atau tidak? Tetap seperti pendirian. Saya tidak bisa berbuat apa-apa, Pak. Akhirnya saya diseret ke tembok dan dipukuli dengan sepeda. Sampai saya merasa gelap. Semuanya gelap, saya tidak ingat apa-apa. Tahu-tahu saya sudah ada di kantor CPM. Di situ saya diketemukan dengan seorang laki-laki. Lalu saya ditanya, kenal dengan ini tidak? Saya tidak kenal. Laki-laki itu ditanya, juga jawabnya enggak kenal, kami memang tidak berkenalan. Karena hari itu kebetulan sudah pagi, maka kami diborgol bersama, dimasukkan dalam sebuah sel. Pukulan atau karena dibakar dengan rokok dan api. Akhirnya kami diletakkan di sel itu dalam keadaan sama-sama parah. Karena saya merungi diri saya, kenapa saya menerima perlakuan seperti ini? Saya tidak sempat berbincang kepada laki-laki itu. Setelah 3 hari, saya dikeluarkan dari sel bersama laki-laki itu, dibawa ke kantor pemeriksaan CPF. Kembali pertanyaan yang sama, kamu kenal laki-laki ini tidak? Ya, saya tidak bisa menjawab yang lain kecuali jawaban pertama. Saya tidak kenal, Pak, saya tidak kenal. Lalu laki-laki itu pun juga ditanya, tetap dalam seperti kami bertemu di ruang pemeriksaan yang pertama. Akhirnya kami disuruh memilih. Kamu pilih mengaku, kenal, melakukan gerakan gaya politik, atau kamu saya telanjangi. Tetapi akhirnya kok kami ditelanjangi. keadaan saling telanjang begitu disaksikan mereka yang ada di situ. Kami tanyakan lagi, kamu milih saya posisikan duduk berpangkuan atau mengaku kalau kalian melakukan gerilya politik. Saya hanya bisa menangis karena jawaban saya tidak pernah mereka dengarkan. Kembali kami dipukuli sampai mereka mengatakan kami tunggu pengakuanmu. Aku hanya berdoa kepada Tuhan, beri aku akhirnya tanpa saya duga sama sekali badan saya diangkat diposisikan membuat. Bisa stop dulu sebentar?
Yes, of course. Should we adjourn or should we stay here?
Entah berapa lama, tahu-tahu saya sudah berada di sel kembali dalam keadaan diborgol berdua. Tangan kami berdua diborgol. Setelah itu, saya sakit. Tidak ada nafsu makan sama sekali dan sakit untuk sementara waktu. Karena sakit saya tidak sembuh-sembuh. Akhirnya saya dipindahkan ke penjara Wirogunan. Di penjara Wirogunan dengan keadaan badan saya yang penuh luka, saya dirawat oleh ibu-ibu yang berada di situ. Tapi kalau saya ditanya ibu-ibu, saya tidak bisa ngomong karena saya malu. Dan saya tidak mampu berbicara. Akhirnya ibu-ibu menasihati saya, kalau kamu tidak makan, kamu bisa mati. Jangan menambah penderitaan sendiri dengan tidak makan, tidak minum. Karena perawatan ibu-ibu yang sangat penuh kasih, akhirnya saya tergugah. Mengapa ibu-ibu itu begitu perhatian pada saya? Membuatkan baju saya dari kantong terigu, memberi makanan saya, bahkan ibu-ibu itu menawarkan untuk menyuapi saya. Lama-lama saya tergugah karena kasih beliau yang tulus ingin mensupport saya supaya tetap bertahan hidup dalam penderitaan yang bagaimanapun. Setelah saya agak sehat, saya dipanggil kembali, ditemukan dengan orang lain, ditanya hanya untuk ditanya, kamu kenal dengan ini tidak? Saya semakin heran, mengapa mereka selalu mencari orang yang ditanyai untuk kenal atau tidak. Sampai kapan penderitaan saya ini akan berakhir dengan tuduhan-tuduhan semacam itu? Saya sering diperiksa dan setiap pemeriksaan itu sebelumnya mesti terdengar deru mobil. Karena pada waktu itu belum saya dipanggil periksa. Berkali-kali saya dipanggil periksa. Dan pada suatu saat saya dipanggil periksa lagi. Tapi saya heran, kok malah tidak ada yang diperiksa lainnya ini, kok saya sendiri ada apa ya? Akhirnya saya menemukan jawabannya. Memang hanya saya sendiri, karena yang ditanyakan, berapa lama kau melakukan gerilya politik? Berapa orang anggota gerilya politik itu? Ya saya malah menjadi bingung. Kok tidak seperti dulu pertanyaannya? Ya saya jawab, Pak, saya ini tidak melakukan gerilya politik. Saya sudah punya posisi yang mapan sebagai mahasiswa dan sebagai guru. Kenapa gerilya? Buat apa gerilya? Adik saya membutuhkan saya, ibu saya membutuhkan saya. Tetapi dengan pertanyaan ini tanpa dinyana dan saya ditendang kepala saya, dan saya ditelanjangi lagi. Dalam keadaan telanjang itu, saya dipegangi dua orang, mengarah kepada setiap pemeriksaan. Sebentar, Pak. Setelah selesai, mereka semua yang ada di situ, saya ditanya lagi tentang hal yang sama. Saya tidak bisa menjawab. Saya dimaki-maki, kenapa kamu diam saja? Lalu saya ditengkurapkan dan saya diinjak-injak. Dan rambut saya digunduli. Dan entah bagaimana, saya tidak ingat lagi karena saya merasa gelap, semula hanya merasa gelap. Katanya ibu-ibu saya digotong karena badan saya penuh luka dan tidak bisa jalan. Sesudah itu saya tidak mau ngomong, tidak mau makan lagi. Saya merasa hidup saya sudah berakhir. Sampai 8 bulan saya mengalami hidup stres. Dan akibat dari stres ini, selama 8 bulan saya tidak mensurasi. Menurut dokter, saya harus tenang pikiran saya supaya saya bisa mensurasi. Mau tenang bagaimana? Hidup sudah tidak ada apa-apanya lagi bagi saya. Tapi dokter bilang, Mbak harus berdoa, harus kuat, harus berserah.
Ibu, apakah Ibu tahu siapa yang menangkap Ibu?
Yang menangkap saya adalah CPM dan tentara. Yang menyiksa saya, yang paling kejam itu adalah, boleh saya menyebut namanya?
Boleh.
Bu, boleh saya menyebut namanya?
Boleh.
Namanya Lukman Sutresna.
Apakah selama Ibu ditahan, Ibu pernah melihat atau mendengar tahanan perempuan diperlakukan serupa dengan Ibu?
Setelah saya di pelantungan, Hal seperti itu pernah banyak dirasakan teman-teman saya yang dari Klaten, teman-teman yang muda, seusia SMP dan SMA, diperlakukan sama seperti itu. Lakukan seperti itu. Kok ditangkap seperti itu? Mereka menjawab, katanya mereka itu melakukan mengejar target. Karena korban yang dipenjara, orang-orang yang dipenjara belum ada sama jumlahnya dengan anggota PKI. Lah apa hubungannya dengan kita? Ya sama-sama nggak tahu, Mbak. Mereka cuma menjawab begitu. Kan PKI harus dihancurkan, dimusnahkan seakar-akarnya. Jadi kita dikatakan PKI. Ya saya semakin tidak mengerti.
Kalau saya tanya, apakah Ibu bisa memberikan estimasi berapa jumlah mereka yang mengalami penyiksaan seperti Ibu?
Kalau yang diperlakukan seperti saya itu kurang lebih 10 atau 11 orang anak muda.
Jadi Ibu ditahan di mana saja, Bu?
Saya ditahan di Wirogunan, Yogyakarta, dipindahkan ke Bulu Tahanan Perempuan, lalu dipindahkan ke Pelantungan, yang dipersiapkan katanya untuk kembali kepada masyarakat. Tetapi di Pelantungan ini bentuk penderitaannya adalah lain.
Seperti apa, Bu?
Kami didatangkan ke Pelantungan, sebuah lembah bekas pembuangan lepra pada zaman Belanda. Tetapi karena pasien-pasien lepra sudah bersosialisasi dengan masyarakat, sudah sembuh, sudah punya keturunan, sehingga daerah itu menjadi kosong, berubah menjadi hutan atau semak-semak belukar. Dan waktu kami dibawa ke situ, gedungnya dibuat dari papan, tapi belum ada penerangan, jadi masih gelap. Tidak jarang dari kami digigit kalajengking atau binatang-binatang yang lain, ular misalnya, karena di situ banyak ular. Pertama kali yang kami hadapi, kami harus kerja paksa, merubah semak belukar dan membuat lahan pertanian, membuat kolam untuk perikanan dengan tangan kosong. tangan telanjang.
Ibu, jadi Ibu totalnya ditahan selama berapa lama, Bu?
Saya ditahan selama 13 tahun dan 1 tahun sama 10 tahun. Yang masuk belakangan itu 10 tahun dan itu 4 bulan itu.
11 tahun ya totalnya.
Iya.
Apakah sampai sekarang Ibu merasakan akibat-akibat dari penahanan itu? Sering sakit misalnya?
Ya. Jelas sakit. Tubuh-tubuh tertentu yang digilas pakai kayu dan lain sebagainya. Lalu yang dipukuli pakai sepeda itu dampaknya adalah pendengaran saya sangat berkurang, terutama dalam satu telinga, sehingga yang berfungsi hanya satu telinga. Dan saya karena penderitaan itu juga saya menderita penyakit darah tinggi.
Baik, terima kasih Ibu. Kami berterima kasih atas keberanian Ibu untuk menjadi saksi di tribunal. Kesaksian Ibu sangat berguna bagi proses tribunal ini. I have no further question, Your Honor.
Thank you very much indeed. I personally, and I'm sure my colleagues too, salute your courage in coming here and talking to us. We may still need to ask you questions again a little bit later, but we will try and make sure that we are gentle and good about it. So you will have to wait a little bit longer until we finish the evidence. In fact, you may even have to come back tomorrow, but we will make it as comfortable for you as we can.
Iya, terima kasih Yang Mulia.
Your Honors, we will proceed with expert witness.
So, Your Honors, I would like to proceed with our second witness and expert, Ms. Wieringa, and would ask her to take the seat.
Thank you.
On the count of sexual violence, we have now an expert on this topic here with us, Mrs. Saskia Wieringa. She will give us background information on sexual some information about her qualification as an expert on sexual violence to you. Mrs. Wieringa is a full professor at the University of Amsterdam with a background of research on Indonesia for more than 30 years. She has examined the Indonesian women's movement associated with the Communist Party, Gavani, since 1981. In those years, she worked with women who had just come out of prison. She has published widely on this topic. Her book, Sexual Politics in Indonesia, from 2002, is a classic in this field. After being blacklisted for 13 years, Mrs. Wieringa returned to Indonesia in 1998. Since then, she returns and does research regularly and In 1998, 1999, she was struck by the parallels of the violence between the victims of 1965 and of the May riots in 1998, in which an unknown number of Chinese women were raped and otherwise violated. More recently, she has studied the Komnas Ham files and also other written reports of sexual violence, including those of Annie Pohlmann and the research of Ita Nadia, for whose book she wrote a preface. Mrs. Wieringa, is this correct?
This is correct.
Your Honours, the prosecution is about to submit to you the researcher's report on sexual violence. The evidence provided in this report draws in part on the documentation provided in the 2007 report It is entitled Gender-Based Crimes Against Humanity, Listening to the Voices of Women Survivors of 1965. The Komnas Perempuan report draws on 120...
Before you go into the detail of that, could we give it an identifying mark of some sort?
This here?
Yeah, the report that you're putting up now.
Yeah, I would do this at the end and then deliver this as a piece of evidence to you.
Okay.
This report draws on 122 testimonies, many of which were included into our researcher report that we submit to you or are about to submit to you. Mrs. Wieringa, you know this report. Are these cases part of the Komnas Ham report?
Of the Komnas Ham 2012 report?
Yes.
No, they are different sources.
Okay.
Before I would like to speak, I've been reflecting on this, on the Komnas Ham report. I would like to say a few things. First of all, the reports that we heard, and also the gripping testimony just now, these are the testimonies of the survivors. We only know the voices of the survivors. And I'm saying this because so many women, men too, of course, after torture, and we don't know how many, died. And I give an example. We were touring, it's not a tourist event at all. We were searching for evidence in Indonesia of 600 to 800 people in Purwodadi in the Kebun Raya. The witness who took us there, who had participated in the murders, by carrying the lamp, he had seen everything, all the torture, all the murders executed. He said there are more mass graves. At that moment, he took us, he guided us in our jeep to the tea plantation Wonosari. He said in the tea plantation Wonosari there are 3 more mass graves, much smaller. He took us to the mass grave in Wonosari at the top of Wonosari. He said, I have seen the bodies here, which is rare because there are only the exhumation of the first day, and now there is another exhumation in Bali. But these bodies were exhumed because they were exposed because of a landslide. So the workers in the tea plantation all of a sudden saw those bodies. And one of them, he was there, he saw the bodies, and he said one of the bodies was a woman. because he could see that because there were, she had still apa itu perhiasan, trinkets or something, and her hips and everything there was totally bruised and broken. She had been raped with stick or whatever, and her whole inner body was broken. Now those stories I've heard all over. Women who have been sticks or bottles pushed into their vaginas. The bottles were then broken and they died of bleeding. Or they were raped to such an extent that they became mad, and that they committed suicide, or I would first of all like to say we only have the voices of the survivors.
Yeah, thank you for this additional very important information. Ms. Wieringer, you have heard the testimony of one of the survivors of sexual violence in the context of the 1965 events. We have only one witness, one survivor here before this tribunal. I would like to ask you to put this testimony into a broader context. You have conducted research yourself and know all the research that was conducted on sexual violence during the 1965 events in Indonesia, as far as it is published, of course. Could you give us a first overview? What forms of sexual violence crimes were committed?
Yes. First of all, there's another note on methodology. When I first conducted research on sexual violence in the early 80s, and I spoke with the women who had just come out of prison, they would tell me stories of sexual violence, but those stories never happened to them. They always happened to others, according to their statements. Only after Reformasi, as it is called, in 1998, when the dictator Suharto was forced to step down, groups of women came together, and two of those groups conducted these kinds of what we call in anthropology a focus group discussion groups with women in which women shared. And have kind of yielded, given their information to this report. These are testimonies. They consist of oral history stories. Then there are other stories collected by researchers themselves of Komnas Perempuan, which are also oral history stories, which are stored in Komnas Perempuan. The others are stored in Syarikat and Tutur, Linggur Tutur. There are a collection, small collection, 17 stories collected in Lontar, that's also an NGO, and 6 stories from Contrast. These are the stories that we have collected in this report that we would like to submit to you. Then the main researcher of this part of the report is Annie Polman, who herself has written a book entitled Women's Sexual Violence and the Indonesian Killings, and she has collected another 160 stories. These are the stories that we have collected. Now, again, there are many stories that are not directly collected. There is a story that I've heard very often told in 1981, which is a very telling story. It is a story of a young woman, a young man who have been just married, both of them arrested, and they were forced to have sex in front of their interrogators, the army, while their genitals were subjected to electric shocks. That was extremely painful. They were shouting. The way that man and the soldiers raped her. And in front of the eyes, in front of the eyes of her husband. And they said, you see, we are men, we can do it better. Right? This shows that the patterns of violence that we see, and I'll come to the forms of violence later, the patterns of violence, well, first of all, to collect fake confessions, the kind of confessions that we heard from our witness. The confessions were mostly related to the lies that were produced by we still don't know who, but definitely the military, which I have collected in my book, Sexual Politics in Indonesia. The lies that the field where the generals were killed, crocodile hole. The generals were killed overall, they were some were not yet dead. They were killed there. Their bodies recently compared to which is contained in the Comas report. Their bodies are clear killed by they were beaten with the rifle there, but the stories always said were that the girls were present. There were girls present at 60 girls or something like that. They were present at that field. 13, 14-year-old girls, younger than our witness at that moment. They were members for a campaign that Sukarno was waging at the time against Malaysia, the kind of thing that you see in many nationalist kind of circumstances, wielding sticks, shouting slogans, singing songs, that kind of thing, marching around, that those girls were woken up at night by the shrieks. They witnessed the generals being killed. I have interviewed 4 or 5 surviving girls, and then the generals were thrown into a well. The story that was circulated, and this is one picture, I've got several pictures, is that those girls were dancing in front of the general, naked, singing a song which was very popular at the time, Genjer, Genjer. It is a song, it was actually composed in Banyuwangi, East Java, and told about poverty during the Japanese period, and they were collecting weeds and cutting it and cooking it. Genjer, Genjer. Everybody, all the old women know it. Very popular all over. The girls were said that they were singing that. They were dancing nakedly, the dance of the fragrant flowers. And they then tortured the generals, raped them, and castrated them. There is no sign of castration in the bodies in the Visum et Repertum, the proof of which is in this document. There is no sign of that at all. But this story went wild all over. And we'll talk about that tomorrow when we talk about the propaganda campaign. It was spread all over the country through radios, through speeches, whatever. Everybody was made to believe and castrate our honorable military. And this is why, with the story that our witness also tells, everybody was searching for the so-called Chap Kerwani, the stamp of Kerwani. The women, the stories of whom we have collected, were routinely undressed They were routinely, kind of, the bodies were searched with some kind of, you know, all these hands of these grabbing hands, these groping hands of these men on their bodies. Where is the Chap Karwani? This is a modern day witch hunt. The women were seen as devils, they were seen as witches, and by association the Communist Party was seen as, and produced as seen as, projected as hypersexual. What kind of party is this that trains women to castrate generals and to dance naked? And that's also why the women were always routinely undressed. And there are stories also in our reports that the women were forced to dance. Women all over the country who had never heard of Lubang Buaya. Our witness also said it. She was accused. Have you been in Lubang Buaya? That was the kind of story that they were supposed to have to confess. Nobody ever heard of Lubang Buaya. In Bali they didn't know where Lubang Buaya was. In Yogyakarta they didn't know where Lubang Buaya was. Yet they were accused that they were present at Lubang Buaya. As a Karwani woman, everybody was, as a woman even, everybody was accused of being there. So that was one purpose. The purpose. So those kinds of testimonies, they had to sign. And the emasculation, like we can do it better, the witches, the devil, and of course torture itself, just to break the women. Now the forms of mostly vaginal rape, some forms of oral rape, and often in the form of a gang rape. The gang rape and also the rapes were cases mostly of military men, and also in some cases, particularly when the women were captured, also because the teams that captured the people usually were composed of both military people and of so-called guards or militias, member of militias, the ninja that Pak Martono also talked about, right? So they were kind of mostly civilian. These could be militias, half military, or youth groups of Islamic groups. Sometimes the men were on the run, and then the women were kind of their wives. We have some cases here. Their wives had to show where their men were, and while they were being toured on the truck, while they were being detained in their homes or on the trucks, they were gang raped in order to intimidate the men. You must tell where your husband is so that we can capture him. The other form that we often find in the testimonies is sexual slavery. Sexual slavery in the sense that one of the girls of the young women is being taken, usually without any form of marriage, to do kind of forced sex labor, but also combined with domestic labor. This could be guards, prison wardens, or whatever. And sometimes this all happened in conditions of extreme coercion. The women had no powerless, that when they were officially released, there are some stories of that, they just stayed with their captors, also because they had no place where to go. In some cases, they were also married, sometimes as a secondary wife usually, and then put to work in the households of the so-called first wives, where they of course were beaten and raped. There are also cases of prostitution, sexual forced prostitution, in the sense that the women belonged to one man, or were seen to belong to one man, usually a military man, who then gave the women to other military men for money. So then there is the one who receives the money is the so-called owner, the slave owner of this particular woman. There are many cases of torture, particularly electric shocks of the genitals and the breasts. As I said, there is also forms of forced marriages, and in some cases we have husbands being captured, being arrested, just in order, and killed, just in order because some military man was already lusting after that particular wife, and the wife was then forced to marry that particular man. So those kinds of forms are the forms that we see most widely. The regions that the stories come from are from Java, the central island, Sumatra, the big island to the left. Sorry?
May I just, before you continue to the rapes,
forced pregnancies, forced abortions, sometimes the children were taken away from them, sometimes the children were born in prison and stayed with them in prison. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, move on.
Yeah, so all these forms we see. So the pattern is widespread. Sharikat has conducted, which is a women's group mostly originating in Yogyakarta, has conducted research in 18 cities in Java. These are contained in this report, and in Madura. Lingkar Tutur Perempuan, which has been kind of having communal discussions with women survivors, meetings since 2001, has three kinds of tutur, three kinds of groups, in Solo, Central Java, in East Kalimantan, and in Bali, Gianyar. So the testimonies are also contained in this report. Then there have been also people involved in this report who collected testimonies only for this report or for their own research that they then included in this report. Ita Nadia, who went together with Ibu Sulami. Ibu Sulami is she's since deceased, the vice chair of Gerwani. Annie Polman also went around, particularly Java and Sumatra, collecting evidence of 160 cases, which as far as pattern is concerned is similar to to the court here. So the patterns is widespread all over the archipelago. They're all under conditions of extreme coercion. Women have no say whatsoever over their bodies. It's mainly women, but also some men, and I'll come to that later. Young women and girls. The perpetrators are all men, security services, and all forms of military. The places of the sexual violence and torture and rape are mostly in detention, like we also heard from our witness, but also sometimes in the homes. Sometimes also the women were visited regularly. They were kind of captured in their own home. Military men who would come and say, we've got your husband, come on, I will, you can't go nowhere, and they raped them regularly. The most forms of sexual torture and violence took place during the interrogation. But the interrogation was not a one-time thing, which I've also found out later when I did more research on the files of the Komnas HAM report, the 2012 report, on those kinds of forms that have been made available to us. The interrogation came in waves. Whenever somebody, we don't know, in Jakarta needed more kind of confessions, a regional research team, Tepelda, would come with a question. They wanted a confession on this, or they wanted a confession of that. And in the case of the men, the confessions that the regional report Tepelda sought were, for instance, proof, so-called proof, that there were caches, hiding places of weapons. This is total lie, these fakes. But then, if the men broke and signed, then it was seen as proof that there were these kinds of caches. And for women, the story was always about sexual violence, about the Lubang Buaya myth, about dancing, about being trained to dance nakedly, or whatever they needed. They came up with stories regularly in the newspapers during a number of years. Most of those stories are in this book, Sexual Politics in Indonesia. And the women were regularly forced to kind of accede to these kinds of confessions. Even the confessions, this is again my own research, apart from the young girls present at Lubang Buaya, there were also 3 or 4, we don't know exactly how many, members of Gurwani, adult members of Gurwani. Particularly 2 names came up, Emmy and Jamila. And the military started searching for Emmy and Jamila. Where is Emmy? Where is Jamila? They never found the real Emmy and the real Jamila, but they found many fake Emmys or Jamilas, or I couldn't say fake, women with the same name. There are 3 or 4 cases of some Emmy somewhere being caught and being terribly tortured, raped. We know now some of the methods that the military consort to in order to confess that they were the Emmy in the field. About Gurwani. She was an illiterate woman. She was working. Her regular working place was actually the military base, the Air Force base at Halim. She was just released from prison, from the ordinary ward in prison, where again routinely she was raped. But she was sort of used to that. And then again she was picked up. You're Emmy. Then you are the Emmy who is the Gurwani member at Lubang Buaya. Of course, she had never heard of Gurwani. She had no idea. Terribly raped, terribly tortured. In the end, she was promised that she would get the enormous sum of 1,200,000 rupiah if she would just sign, because thumbprint the story. She did that because she was told that then the rapes and the torture and the beatings would stop. She did that, and she was given 200 rupiah, not the 1 million. And even when she was released 13 years later, she never got that 1 million rupiah. And then in prison she learned about Gurwani. Ibu Sulami and Ibu Sujina, whom I've worked with for 3 years, in 1981 until 1984. Until in 1986 I was myself blacklisted and I could not go to the country again. They both knew her in prison. The same happened to Jamila. They picked up 3 or 4 Jamila. There is a book of one of those Jamila. Actually she was called Jamila, so with an E, not an A. Jamila. And she again was forced to commit, after terribly beatings and things and so on, that she was woman. This is the only time, the only case that I know of all the stories that I have investigated, in which a superior officer came in when she was about to be raped, and she was about to be killed actually, because she was a wild, strong person, and when they were about to rape her, she kicked the soldier who was trying to rape her with such success that his scrotum burst, and she was about to be killed for that. And then the superior officer, who heard all this hullabaloo in the room, in the interrogation room, beside where he was sitting, and he said, "Don't kill her, we still need her." And that is the only case in which a superior officer intervened. All the other times, all the officers who were raping, who were torturing, who were mutilating the women were left to do that, while the superior officers knew about these things.
Yeah, exactly. I would so that you start with this topic. So perhaps to conclude with the pattern that you've described, and I find it very striking, this specific stripping naked and searching for this mark or tattoo of Garwani. And this is a very specific activity which you could observe countrywide. This is correct?
There is, of course, no tattoo of Garwani. It is a total lie. This was, again, one of these myth-making things that whoever in the military thought up these things did. Nobody had any tattoo, so they never found it.
Yeah.
So even when interrogation was again held, some months later, some years later, they would again undress the woman, grope all over, try to find the tattoo, and then again there was the report, no, there is no tattoo on this woman.
Yeah. So I believe that allows to concluding that this is a measure that was based, even if we don't have it in writing, but based, because it was common practice and a very specific thing, so based on an order. So there was not a single officer from the military that thought, okay, I will look for a tattoo. So that was a countrywide, and several times, even when they were already in detention and again interrogated, so that we can at least from the action that they took derive then that would be the submission of the prosecution, that there is an order behind, even if so far, or to my knowledge, there is no written order available, but from the common pattern that we can observe here, we can derive this. I would move to the perpetrators, and you said already normally nobody intervened. There were many situations that you described where group of perpetrators is present during interrogation, also in detention cases or other cases where they didn't act alone, either with bystanders or all involved, directly involved. I would like to move whether you have a knowledge that these actions were known or crimes were known and were punished, or that the superiors in other contexts.
Yeah. I mean, a military, at this scale, it is impossible, right, that these kinds of things are being kept silent. So apart from that, it's already impossible, because it was such a common thing to do. And there were always superiors and inferiors. There's mention of captains, lieutenants, wardens, soldiers. I mean, from the local levels, of course, not the generals at the top. But, I mean, captains, major, lieutenant, those kinds of ranks are there. And so, I mean, It was simply a matter of impunity, right? They could do it, and that's why they did it. Because nobody stopped them, and it was just totally allowed. Because anyway, these women were already seen as prostitutes, right? Because of the myths, the lies about Gerwani in Lubang Buaya, they were seen as common property and as loose and devilish women, not fit for any kind of proper treatment, garbage of society.
Thank you. I would like to move to my last question. That is a topic which you encountered when you interviewed victims, so that means survivors, and it's limited to this group, of course. Could you elaborate a little bit on what effects you could observe, what women told you, what effect these different forms of consequences that they faced or facing until today?
The first effects are shame and guilt. This is also why when I started my research in the early 80s, none of the women whom I interviewed said I was raped. Because they always told me a story of somebody else was raped. But when in 1998 I could go into the country again, into Indonesia again, and we were sitting with a group of women and women survivors of 65, discussing the terrible rapes of Chinese women, and others were also talking about the same pattern that had happened in Timor-Leste some decades ago, or 15 years before that, about the rape, the cutting of the breasts. We don't have stories of survivors, we have stories of survivors seeing cutting of breasts. Then the women who I had worked with before and who had all the time said, it's not me, it's somebody else, then they broke. Sorry, I'm still there. I'm still there. And they said, it's me. It's me. It happened to us. It happened to us. We too were raped. Sticks pushed into my vagina, my friend's vagina. We were raped again and again and again and again. So then they broke. So then they could tell the stories. And then, of course, we found, and to our again and again the same things, the electric shocks, the cutting off of the breasts, the pushing of sticks into the vagina, the gang rapes. It is a pattern of the military, and because there is this culture of impunity, it is happening again. And I don't know what is happening at this moment in Papua. I don't know what the military is doing again and again, but this is what they do, the military in Indonesia, with women who they consider activists. And it is based, or it is founded in, the myth of Lubang Buaya. I've got students who come to me and they said, Saskia, I read your book, and then only then I understood why I was accused of being a whore. A student selling the books of Parmudia Rantatur, we have heard his name. His books were prohibited. Selling the books on the street. They were thrown in prison. Both they were very brave activists in the early 90s. They were thrown in prison, the men and the women. And the men were beaten. But the women were beaten much harder, and they were shouted that you are whores, you are whores, you are whores. Lonteng Gerwani, that was the term, whore, Gerwani whores. And she asked, why? A whore? Me? I mean, why? I'm very careful of my reputation. I'm a virgin. I'm an activist. I'm a virgin. Why am I called a whore? But when she read the story of Gurwani and Lubang Buaya, she realized, this is why they call me whores. This story lives on. It is underground. It's like one of these peat fires that we have just witnessed in on which women's activism is judged. And this is actually coming back to my first research. When I first came into Indonesia to do research, I was a feminist, a scholar and a feminist at the time, and I expected to find at least some form of a women's movement. But it is as if I entered a shell-shocked or a bombarded city. There was a gap, a total gap, a hole. There was no activism. There were no women activists. And before, I of course knew that the Gurwani movement was 1.5 million members. They were strong, they were active, there were records of them talking at conferences internationally. They were well known, they were well liked. I've got letters from India in which they asked, how do you do this, Gurwani women? Mobilizing so many activists. And when I came in 1980, total silence, absolute absence. Nobody did any kind of activity for poor women anymore. You could not speak about women's rights. You could not speak about equal opportunities or any of those things. And the Gurwani women fought for that. They reached out to poor women. They helped peasants. They fought against prostitution, by the way. They fought, of which they were accused in the most ironic way possible. They fought against KDRT, how do you call it, domestic violence. All those kinds of issues that the women's movement now is taking up again. The Indonesian women's movement has been dead for 32 years. Only small groups have tried to come up again later. Their history has been taken away from them. And this is what I wanted to research. How is that possible?
And that helps, I think, also women today to understand more about history and why the state the situation is as it is now in Indonesia, and also to describe beyond the individual consequences for each of these women who were sexually abused and raped and so on, but also the societal impact that these crimes committed as they were widespread and systematically in Indonesia. I don't have more questions for the time being, because we have also a lot in the report that we are about to submit to you, Your Honours. But
I would like to add one element that, because I mean the testimonies here are of women. The Komnas Perempuan 2012 report has also collected 35 cases of sexual violence, which are not here, and these are 24 cases of male forms of sexual violence and 11 forms of female sexual violence. The female cases in the Komnas HAM 2012 report are similar to what is here in the Komnas Perempuan report, but the forms of sexual violence are also gendered, in the sense that the men experienced other forms of sexual violence. They were also undressed. The women were routinely undressed, but the men were undressed, but they were mostly allowed to keep their underpants on. The women not, they were totally naked. And then There's no report in the Komnas Ham 2012 report of men being raped, but we know of rumors, so it must have happened, so we don't know that. And what was also happening administered sexual electric shocks on their genitals.
Thank you very much also for this additional information, which we hadn't addressed before. I thank you very much, Dr. Wieringer, for this expert statement, and would then hand over to the chief prosecutors or to you judges to perhaps ask more questions,
Yes.
be it to the witness, the survivor, or to the experts.
The time has gone, and I would like to know from the Chief Prosecutor what they suggest. Should we do these questions tomorrow? It could take another 20 minutes or so.
We don't mind if we do it tomorrow, Your Honor.
If my colleagues would nod or shake their head.
Yeah.
Tomorrow?
Yes.
All right, thank you. My colleagues seem to agree. Thank you very much once again. I'll have the opportunity to thank you properly tomorrow. But we've had a long afternoon. It's been difficult very, very difficult for the witnesses, and been difficult for many of the people in the audience, and I'm sure it's been difficult for all the judges, and therefore it is appropriate for us to adjourn now until tomorrow morning. So we will adjourn.
Ladies and gentlemen, before you leave, if you would just bear with me for a second, there is an announcement to be made. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been communicated that many of the people in the audience feel that there are so many accounts now of pain and torture and sadness, and everybody takes it home. Some of us have sleepless nights, and some participants have proposed that we have a little ceremony during this tribunal to give a place to feelings of sadness, commemorate some of the people who have died or have suffered, or even of course have suffered here as survivors in exile. And we propose to do that on Friday during lunchtime, and we would like to make it a little beautiful meeting where we can have flowers, present candles, and perhaps, if you like, you can write a name of a beloved person, and we put those names in a bowl. And you can also, if you like, write a small poem or something from your heart to somebody from your heart. We will keep it simple. You can do it the way you like, as you like. in a place which we will dedicate to this little ceremony.
Okay. Saya menerjemahkan dalam bahasa Indonesia, mungkin sedikit berbeda versinya. Jadi dalam upaya menggali kejahatan terhadap kemanusiaan ini, bagi kita, bagi korban dan penyintas dan juga keluarga, ada banyak kepedihan, kemarahan karena rasa kemanusiaan yang terkoyak, rasa keadilan yang dipaksa untuk hilang. Karenanya kami mengajak para hadirin semua untuk bersama-sama menghadiri semacam upacara kecil di mana kita ingin terlibat dalam berbanyak hal. Mereka yang terhalang pulang, mari kita bersama-sama menghargai semua pengalaman yang telah mereka alami. Kami mengajak Anda semua untuk menuliskan pesan, boleh berupa doa, harapan, atau apa saja yang Anda anggap ingin Anda sampaikan. Dan dengan seizin Anda, apabila diperkenankan, pesan, harapan, dan doa, puisi, atau apapun bentuknya, apabila diperbolehkan, ingin ditampilkan di dalam edisi terakhir majalah Bhinneka, agar yang dipimpin oleh kawan kita Suchen Marching, agar pesan yang kita sampaikan tidak hanya bergaung di dalam ruang ini, tetapi bisa didengar juga oleh mereka yang berada di Indonesia maupun di tempat-tempat lain di seluruh dunia. Ya, demikian ajakan kami.
The poems and the messages to be included in my magazine, because I can't, of course, publish everything, but I'll try my best to publish as much as possible. So please write your poems, write your messages, and I'll try to publish them in my magazine. It's called Bhinneka. Thank you. Terjemahkan ya. Kenapa? Oh yeah, it can be anonymous, so it's fine. I'll translate it into Indonesian now. Jadi sebelum diterbitkan akan saya seleksi dulu karena saya tidak bisa menerbitkan semua di majalah. Tapi saya akan berusaha sebanyak mungkin saya terbitkan pesan-pesan dan puisi-puisinya. Dan bisa anonim ya, bisa pakai nama samaran juga kalau nama asli tidak mau disebutkan dalam majalah saya. Makasih banyak. Please approach me, especially about this IPT. If you want to submit your photos, articles, or whatever, approach me after this, or approach me tomorrow and we can talk about it. Thank you.